Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbart Gaming. This is my spooky and Halloween episode this year, which will cover one of the scariest games I've ever seen, Street Fighter the movie. I'm sorry if the mere mention of this game terrified you or caused you to lose control of any bodily functions. I'm going to show you the entire arcade game, and then a little bit of the Saturn version, which has the same name but is entirely different, and then after that, I'll finish up with a little bit of side-by-side comparison, even though the games are different, just so you can compare the spooky qualities of each. Alright, here's Street Fighter the movie, the arcade game. It hit arcades in 1995, the year after the actual Street Fighter movie. Much like the movie it's based on, it absolutely sucks. I can't tell you how much I hate that movie. I don't even think it's campy fun, and no, I don't think time has made it a cult classic despite what a lot of people say online. It's just bad. Okay, rant over, back to the game. The arcade version of Street Fighter the movie was developed by incredible technologies, known for monster hits like Arlington Horse Racing and Silver Strike Bowling. Yeah, well, they did also develop Time Killers and Bloodstorm, neither of which are exactly anything to brag about. Street Fighter the movie uses digitized people a la Mortal Kombat, and uses most of the actual actors from the movie, although there are places where some of them are their stunt doubles. Now visually, I will give this game some props. The quality of the graphics is pretty good, and there's a lot of animation. Some of the audience scenes are pretty impressive, to be perfectly honest. Character animation is just kind of okay at times, and a lot of the moves look weird because the actors weren't really flexible enough to pull them off. A lot of the backgrounds are cheesy, and the whole thing just has a very odd Mortal Kombat vibe. Some of these backgrounds feel like they'd be pretty at home in MK2 or MK3. Now the characters here are also very large, and one dumb thing visually I have to talk about is the timer. Each number morphs into the next one, which is kind of distracting and might actually catch your eye, drawing your attention away from the combat every now and then. As a side note, some of the characters you might want to have seen in this game are missing, like Blanca and DJ, who are present in both the Saturn and PlayStation versions, and we'll look at that again in a few minutes here. Street Fighter the movie, the arcade game, does add two original characters in Sawada and Blade, and there are 4 different versions of Blade in true MK palette swap fashion. Now, the music in this game is incredibly bland, without a single memorable track. The only real exceptions to that are the ending songs, which are just updated versions of their music tracks primarily from Super Street Fighter 2. Now, gameplay is where Street Fighter games rise or fall, and the gameplay in the arcade version of Street Fighter the movie is by far its biggest and most insurmountable issue. First of all, this game does not remotely feel like any Capcom Street Fighter title that came out after the original. Move timings are very different, and there are some different systems at play behind the scenes, and it's all just super weird. You still get the normal 6-button setup, and most characters have their signature moves. The game also has a super meter and super moves. If you defeat an opponent with a super move, it destroys their life bar, which is kind of an interesting touch. There are also counter and reversal systems here that work different from anything that appeared in Capcom-produced Street Fighter games. There are sort of weird desperation moves in here too. And yeah, I know there are counter throws and stuff in other Street Fighter games, but trust me, they feel a lot different in this one. And there is also a huge emphasis in this game on air juggles, and it just gives this game a pervasive, sloppy, amateurish feeling. So almost any move can combo into almost any other move. And if you think that makes it sound like a fun, intense system,
well, you're wrong!
Against human players, it can be easy to corner people and just stop them from ever getting out of the corner. Against computer opponents, they can just completely wreck you out of nowhere sometimes. Some of the fights are incredibly cheap and frustrating. Alright, now that you know all that stuff, I'm going to switch to some live commentary on the game from this point on. Talking about things that remind me a little too much of Mortal Kombat, I mean, look at this. This is almost exactly like some of the scenes in Mortal Kombat 2. We've got our prisoners who are sort of held up in almost the exact same way as Kano and Sonya were at the end of Mortal Kombat 2 in Shao Kahn's palace. Here instead, we've got Honda and Cammy tied up. Anyway, just... I don't know. It's such a chaotic mess. I really didn't like this game. I had strong opinions about it back when it was new, and I still have strong opinions about it today. It's not well loved, and there's a lot of reason for that. You don't see a lot of people playing this. It's not on any of the collections that come out with Street Fighter 2 games on it, and it's almost like a piece of forgotten history at this point. So filling up the super meters in this one, it's a little bit harder than filling up the super meters in you know, things like Super Turbo or the Alpha games, it takes a little bit more work. And then when you do your super move, like, there's almost nothing special about it. Time doesn't freeze for that split second. You just do it and it comes out. It looks a little flashy. And if you defeat an opponent with it, that's when it destroys their energy bar, which I do think is kind of a neat little effect. Even if it doesn't feel, you know, very Street Fighter-y. There it is right there. A big explosion. All the energy bar just disintegrates. Now, for this background, I mean, there's a lot of colors going on here, and it's kind of picturesque in a way. But the big problem I have with it is it's really busy. Like, I have a hard time sometimes following the characters on this background just because of all the tiny little details that are in here. So they should have made some of these colors a little bit more subtle. And you'll see when we look at the Saturn version of Street Fighter the movie, they don't have this exact same background, but they got one that's a little similar. And they made the color palette a little more muted. And that wasn't because of any limitations of the Saturn and PlayStation. It's because Capcom knows from a design standpoint, you've got to be able to clearly see your characters on top of the background. And then here's Sawada, who is quite different in both the arcade and home versions, which we'll see in a little bit here. Now, Sawada was a character created for the actual movie, and he's one of the main new characters that we have in Street Fighter, the movie, the arcade game. What you're going to see with Sawada is he's got moves that combo like absolute crazy. You'll get tons of hits for lots of different moves that he does. And it's like they went out of their way to say, you know, in Incredible Technologies, hey, this is the first time this character is appearing. He's our character. Let's make him great and way better than any of the others. Because nobody else really has combos that hit like this guy's. I do like for this background that it's at night and we have, you know, subtle color changes on everything. Like, overall, like I told you at the beginning, I think there are things visually very impressive about this game. While a lot of the character animation still isn't great, you know, it's good. It's definitely on par, you know, if not better than, say, Mortal Kombat 2. So it looks good from that perspective, and we're going to see a big change from that when we eventually get to that home version. I'm not teasing, we're going to show it in a minute, we just want to get through the arcade game first. And here is our, speaking of Mortal Kombat from before, our very Mortal Kombat looking character, Blade. There are actually 4 different palette swapped versions of this character. He's a lot like the ninjas from Mortal Kombat that way. Doesn't fit at all in this Street Fighter game, seems completely out of place. And the other thing I love is in this background, if you didn't notice it, watch the hallway. And every now and then, you're going to see Akuma just kind of walking back and forth. What purpose does that serve? I'll tell you what it reminds me of. I'm a huge fan, there he goes, I'm a huge fan of Futurama. And there's the famous episode, That's Lobstertainment. A lot of people hate it, but it's one of my favorites. And in that episode, there's a scene where Harold Zoid is telling all the extras, hey, just because this is a serious movie doesn't mean you can't do some comedy in the background. And I feel that's what the developers of this game did with some of the things they put in backgrounds. Especially this thing with Akuma just going back and forth. He looks really silly just, you know, constantly going back and forth here. And then there, he stops, he poses for a minute, and then he's back on his merry way. What are you doing, Akuma? Why are you just trudging around this mansion? Oh, and one thing I want to make clear, guys, and I'm not trying to hide or anything. Usually I mention this up front. I forgot to in the introduction, so I'll talk about it now. Is I eliminated all the rounds where I lost just so this video could happen a lot faster. I'm not trying to hold myself up as the world's best Street Fighter the movie player. This game is kind of hard at the end, you know, as you get a little bit further into it and get into more enemies. And it's not that much fun, and you wouldn't want to watch me lose a whole bunch of times, so here we are, I cut those things out. I lost several rounds with several different characters, so sometimes you'll see it go from round 1 to round 3, or you'll see me start on round 2 and it'll show rounds 2 and rounds 3. Another thing that's kind of annoying in this is sort of the dizzy technique. You know, for what it takes, you just a whole bunch of hits make a character dizzy, and while that sounds like it's traditional Street Fighter 2 engine kinds of stuff, in this game, it's just a lot more devastating, because you can get so many more hits, and air juggles and everything exist in this one. And then when a character is dizzy, I mean, when the computer does it to you, they might hit you 1,000,000 times in the air before you hit the ground dizzy. So all they gotta do is walk up to you, tap you with a little love jab, and you're done. Now here's a background, and the developers at Incredible Technologies love this technique of putting stuff in the foreground, right? So we've got stuff obscuring our view. Here we've got these beams and the chicken wire and everything in front of us. But what I do find really impressive here, even though there's only like 3 or 4 different people in the foreground in this crowd that they just repeated over and over, and some of them they flipped left and right, the animation itself on these characters in the foreground in the crowd is really smooth. If they would have done a few more characters and had maybe like 8 instead of 4, I think they would have really had something here. And I do also think the perspective view is kind of off on this, and it makes this look weird. Like, those characters are closer to us than the characters that are fighting. So, knowing that they're closer, shouldn't they be a little bit bigger from that perspective? You would think so. Right, anyway, here we are back onto this background and fighting Vega this time. Vega is really annoying in this game, even though you can beat him pretty easily, especially if you're using, I'll call him Ryu, since that's how they say his name in this one from the announcer. You can do very susceptible to dragon punches, of course, anytime he does that little air dash attack, and he does it a lot in this game. So, I mean, you have to be ready for it pretty much at every possible second that he's moving. And you can easily fall behind on Vega and lose to him if you're not careful. So, I mean, generally, you gotta try and sort of keep your distance from him a little bit. Let him come to you, play a little more defensively. That makes it easier to fight and take him down in the end. Now, as far as performing the special moves in this game, the game speed is pretty high. Some people will like that. If you're a fan of ratcheting up that speed in Turbo, you're gonna like the speed that this one plays at. And the controls are pretty responsive. It's not hard to pull off moves or special moves, really easily. Even the super moves aren't too rough to do. Alright, and here we are going up against Balrog, who looks a little small in this. But at least, hey, he looks somewhat like his actual game character, unlike a lot of the other characters in here. Just wait till you see Blanca in the home version. So, this is another character who we're going to see is a lot different, on Saturn and PlayStation than he is in the arcade. In the arcade, he's got these big attacks, and they have big flourishes at the end with large, hitboxes that can damage you, and it can be tough to avoid them. So he's not super hard to beat. I mean, you can keep him at a distance, but it's one thing you're going to see that's way different when we get to him on the Saturn version, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. They kind of took away those, flourishes, and they kept his range more like it is in the actual Street Fighter games. And there we are, super finish, destroy that energy bar, and he's done. Holy cow. Sagat is probably the single worst character to fight in this game. So with him, the reason he's so hard in this one is when he throws, his tiger attacks for his fireballs, the upper one, you can cancel with a regular fireball from, any projectile-based characters. The lower one goes underneath it. So unlike every other Street Fighter 2 engine-based type gameplay that you're used to, from Street Fighter 2 to Super to even things, beyond that, anything with Sagat in it, you can cancel his upper or lower fireballs with a regular fireball from Ryu and Ken and all that. You cannot do that in this one. You throw that normal fireball, that lower one sails right under it. And they also added this weird Sagat-like scream move where he freezes you in place. It's almost again like a Mortal Kombat move that we might see from some characters in 3, where they just, render you defenseless for a second so he can maul you. And I will tell you, I had to do that Sagat fight a lot of times before I won. Full disclosure on that one. So M. Bison here, this is a character that was entirely captured from the stunt double. Raul Julia couldn't do this. he was scheduled to come in and, do recordings for his moves and everything, at least according to what I've read online. But the issue was he was already really sick at this point. He had died shortly after. I mean, Street Fighter was his last movie, and he was apparently not in any condition to try and record the moves. So they went with his stunt double for everything in this instead. So if you think that doesn't quite look like Raul Julia's face, you're right, that's not him. What I do like on this is it's funny how they tried to do some more like traditional sprite-based animation, especially for your, walk-back animation. So you have a still picture, for Ryu there on his arms while his legs move. So they did that, of course, to save a little memory space so they didn't have to animate his top half while he was doing that. They did that instead of capturing complete animation of him, waving his arms a little bit as he was walking backwards too, which we do see in the traditional, bitmapped animated versions of Street Fighter, 2 and the Alpha games and 3 and everything. So yeah, Bison is pretty nuts in this. In the end, I won by a timeout. So we ran out of time. Here we are. Here's Ryu's ending in the arcade game. It's really simple. We get this look at him and it describes what he did. And of course, he's not anything, like actual Street Fighter Ryu from all the other Street Fighter games. No, he learned a little bit from the teachings of Shenlong, and then he's decided to just, help rebuild Shadaloo. Great. That's what Ryu would do. He doesn't walk around looking for fights. He settles in one place for a long time to do things. And there we have our big, long credits for Incredible Technologies. So if you worked on this game, I apologize for excoriating some of it. If you want to reply in the comments or talk to me about it, please feel free to do so. Let me know, what you were up against with this. Now, from what I've read online from a couple of different sources, people at Incredible Technologies thought they were actually developing Street Fighter 3 when they got this deal, and didn't realize at first that they were just making a game, to accompany the movie that had come out. And they thought that, this was going to be a real huge release, and this was going to be a big priority and everything. So obviously that didn't happen. Capcom had their own Street Fighter sequels, in planning long before Incredible Technologies was ever given this game to develop. I kind of wonder, why Capcom decided to go this route with an outside company, which they hadn't done for any of the other Street Fighter arcade games. It's a really strange decision, and we ended up with a game that is just so vastly different from the other Street Fighter games. So it's kind of interesting to see a more Western take on it, but in the end, it just didn't work. It's kind of a failed experiment, I would say. Okay, here's the Saturn version of Street Fighter the movie. This one was developed and published by Capcom and is a lot different from the arcade game. It's not just a port, and it does away with basically all the original gameplay mechanics and concepts that were created for that arcade version, and it much more closely follows the gameplay style of Super Turbo. By the way, I'll show 2 rounds for the interface and the first character so you can get an idea what the game is like. After that, I'm going to reduce this to just 1 round each so we can speed through the game while still seeing everything it has to offer, and then I'll show you a comparison of this next to the arcade game. So very quickly, the backgrounds are different, the controls and some of the moves are a little different, the music is different, the voices are different, and you can tell right off the bat it's a totally different game. The rosters are also a little different. Sawada is present in both versions, but he plays differently in the home version. Blade and his palette swaps are all gone in the home version, Blanca and DJ have been added, and Akuma has been changed from an instantly selectable character from the arcade game to a hidden character like older Street Fighter games and more. So the load times in this home version are noticeably long, and people really hated them back in the day. They're pretty lengthy. The animation in this game is severely reduced, and it's obviously running at a lower resolution. Everything's a lot blockier. The characters are also much smaller, and the lighting between the characters and backgrounds in this version is a little weird. On a lot of backgrounds, the characters look kind of pasted on, like a bad blue screen VFX shot in the movies from like the late 80s or early 90s. Now don't get me wrong, Street Fighter the movie on Saturn and PlayStation doesn't look terrible or anything, but the graphics are absolutely a giant downgrade from the arcade game and probably a bit below average for both Saturn and PlayStation when it comes to animation. Now the music, while not exactly fantastic or anything, is still way better than the droning personality-free tracks of the arcade version of the game. It's a little generic, but it's okay and it won't actively annoy you like the arcade game's music will. Alright, so I'm going to switch over to commentary here now for the Saturn version. So yeah, and looking at this after Street Fighter the movie, even though a lot of it is the same people, the same characters that were recorded for most, of the characters, you can see the animation, which was only okay in the arcade game for the main characters, has been significantly reduced. There's a lot fewer frames for everybody, and everything is a lot more, wooden and stilted than it was in the arcade version. So, like I said, I gave total props to the arcade game for its graphics. The only problem with the arcade game, was that the gameplay just felt so off and the aesthetic, just didn't feel like Street Fighter. Anyway, here we've got some Ryu versus Ryu action, and I love how the palette swap version looks especially pasted on. I mean, I can't stress enough just the lighting, especially between the characters and the backgrounds, is just so awkward and strange in this one. Like, overall, the backgrounds, I think, look really nice. I don't think Capcom really had a handle on what they were doing with digitized characters, or whichever internal team or whoever they got to develop this one. Alright, and then here we are in a fight with Cammy on the docks. And again, I think the background's alright. I think it, is fine. But, again, we see, like, some lighting changes on the characters. It makes it look like they're not really there in position, with those backgrounds. They don't blend together very well. But I'm not going to harp on that really anymore, so I'll leave it there, for right now. We'll come back to it later. But for the moves, it might be a little tough to see, but they feel and execute a lot more like traditional Street Fighter II games, like all the ones that came out before this that had been developed by Capcom. So from that perspective, I think fans of Street Fighter will enjoy this one a lot more than the arcade version of Street Fighter the movie. So here, as we're fighting Guile as Ryu here, and it's clear that the announcer actually says Ryu in this one, we get a fight that just looks a lot better and feels a lot more like something that fits in Street Fighter. And you can see when we do our super combo finishes in this game, we get the flash that we would see in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and it's more similar to what we would see, in later Street Fighter games. And man, these soldiers saluting, I admire them. They have to have the tiredest arms ever. They don't drop that salute or waver even for a split second. Way to go, fellas. So here's Vega in this one, and you can see, looks quite a bit different than the arcade version. He's got a lot less animation, and it's very kind of stiff. And it's disappointing to see. I mean, this was an early game, in the 32-bit generation. It's still kind of disappointing to see all these animation cutbacks. Now, for this stage, it looks kind of like the, beam and chicken wire stage from the arcade one, only it's reversed and we're looking at it from the other side. And the audience, they have a decent amount of animation in the background. It's not super smooth like the arcade version, but that actually looks pretty good. I would say here at least. It wouldn't hurt to see a little bit more, but for what's there, it's fine. And then this is the closest thing we have to one of the other backgrounds in the arcade one, that one that has all the trucks and everything driving by. I'll show them side by side in just a moment here. But here you can see what I was talking about with Balrog earlier. So first up, they made him a little bit larger versus the other characters in this version. Same person, same, guy, but he's bigger. And you'll see his moves, they work more like they do in the older Street Fighter games, and they don't have those big extensions for slashes and everything with those giant hitboxes that are out in front where they can tap you from very far away. Then here's Sawada. This is the closest background to that one that I was mentioning in the arcade where it was just too much color and too much going on. If we look at this one in the jungle, I mean, yeah, it's a little, more drab and muted, but on the flip side, that makes it much easier to see and distinguish the characters than it was in the arcade Street Fighter of the movie game. And here's Sawada, especially, you can see His moves are quite a bit different from the arcade version. Again, just severely reduced animation. I don't understand, why Capcom felt the need to reduce so much of the animation in this game. One thing I'll mention, if you didn't know, is for the Western release of this, like especially here in the US, this was published by Acclaim, believe it or not. Yeah, Acclaim published a Street Fighter game, but unfortunately, it's one of the worst Street Fighter games. But as bad as Street Fighter the movie is, even on, let's say, PlayStation and Saturn, it's still not terrible. But it is, as I mentioned, the worst Street Fighter game of its era, and I'll probably say that one last time before this video is done. Then again, you can see here we've got Zangief, who's a tiny bit bigger in this version when we talk about proportions to other characters than he was in the arcade one. And just so many of the characters, when you look at them, especially like their boots or the edges of their outfits, they do have sort of that blue screen or green screen sort of pasted on look. But I don't know what's worse, that or when you look at the edges, just how much lower the resolution is, on the Saturn and PlayStation versions of this versus the arcade game. So here's DJ, another character that is only in the home version and is not in the arcade game. So for DJ here, he just looks so plain and generic. Would it have been too much to ask to get him sweatpants that said maximum on the side? And I think he's maybe stretched in a little bit too much of a weird way. He looks a little bit thinner than he should. So I think, if I were Capcom putting him into this, I would have worked on getting this look a little more right for him, especially considering he's only in this home version. Alright, so here's Sagat in here, and you can see, once again, they have adjusted his size proportionately, so he is larger than most of the other characters. Meanwhile, in the arcade version, he was only a little bit bigger than other characters like Ryu and Ken. So, Sagat in this version of the game is not nearly as much of a pain in the butt as he is in the arcade version. He doesn't have that weird screaming freeze move, and his fireballs can be cancelled, either as lower ones or upper ones by a regular traditional projectile from characters like Ryu and Ken. So, it's more the way that it's always been, rather than something different like we saw in the arcade version of Street Fighter the movie. This particular background, it's really plain. I mean, if you look at that floor, it's one color with a slight gradient in the background of it. Now, here is our Bison fight, and again, just the washed out colors make him look really pasted on. I don't know why the colors are so washed out on Bison in this. In the arcade, his colors were nice and vibrant and deep, but for all of the sprites in this, all the character sprites, all their colors are a little washed out compared to the arcade version. And you're going to see just how much in a moment when I switch to show you the games side by side for a little bit. And I'm not going to show you complete games on that. We're just going to look at a few different fights and a few different backgrounds that are kind of similar. None of them are the same, of course, which you know why, but you'll see some that are similar. And then there's our super combo finish on that one. You're going to see the ending is quite a bit different for Ryu on here, even though it shares a lot of common elements with that arcade ending we saw. So here we get a different scene with Ryu, and you get to see, oh, look, he's got muscles. But after the defeat of General Bison and the rest of his forces, what does Ryu do in this one? Well, him and Ken both stay, and they help with the reconstruction of Shadaloo City, which is kind of like the ending of the arcade one. So again, a bit out of character. Not that Ryu would help, but he doesn't stay in one place. So in this one they add, as soon as the city began to return to normal, things are a little more Ryu-y here, where he just walks away, and him and Ken go and plan their next big score. If you haven't ever seen the Street Fighter movie, Ryu and Ken are a couple of scammers, for the most part, that do illegal things and make their money by just being terrible to people. So that was one of the things that the movie got just so very wrong about these characters, and one of the reasons that I can't stand it so very much. And here they've added that they make it so that Ryu is watching Ken to make sure he stays out of trouble. Or at least they keep the trouble to a minimum. Alright, so we'll look at some direct side-by-side comparisons here, and then we'll wrap this thing up, folks. Let's have a quick look at some side-by-side action of Street Fighter the movie, arcade on the left, Saturn on the right. Obviously, I can't show you exact like-for-like areas, since the games are different, but I went with stuff as close as I could here. You can really see the difference between the colors, character sizes, and animation in both versions. While the aesthetics of the arcade game are a bit on the ugly side, its technical aspects are pretty strong, especially with the animation. I do think the Capcom version has, much better, more subtle backgrounds, and I think those are a big improvement from the arcade version, and they don't feel out of place in the context of the game or with the characters like they do in the arcade game. Now, when it comes to gameplay, the Saturn version is much more refined and feels a lot more like a traditional Street Fighter game based on a Street Fighter 2 engine. The combos and timing are much more like Super Street Fighter 2, for example. But that doesn't mean the game as a whole is as good as that one. It's just better than the arcade version, which is a chaotic and amateurish mess from a gameplay standpoint. Having basically every move roll into any other just feels like it kills the strategy of the game, especially with all that air juggling. Now, neither version of Street Fighter the movie is great, and I'm not encouraging you to rush out and play it. You don't need to do that. You've seen enough with this video. Still, if you've never tried it, it's hard for me to not recommend that you at least give it a shot, just to look at them out of morbid curiosity. I'd start with the console version first, since it'll be most familiar to you if you're a Street Fighter fan, at least from a gameplay standpoint, and then check out the arcade version after that. But no matter which version you choose, you'll definitely be playing the worst Street Fighter game of its era. Alright, now it's your turn, folks. What did you think of Street Fighter the movie? Did you like the arcade game? Did you hate it? What about the home versions on Saturn and PlayStation? Which version did you think was best? Tell me all about it in the comments. That'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like it and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of my videos. You can support the work I do here on Patreon and Ko-fi, as well as on YouTube here through super thanks and channel memberships. And just as a reminder, I get 3 more Patreon subscribers by November 6th. I'm going to enable ad-free new videos every week for all tiers of Patreon. Alright, with that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.